So now that we know from last Mishnah that broken earthenware vessels can't even become tamei, if it's broken, it can't be tamei. Now we're going to zero in to explain what is considered broken. Because, in the times of the Mishnayos, if a jug broke, if a vessel broke, you didn't just throw away the shards like we would. We would just sweep up all the shards and throw it away. They would actually keep the biggest shards that were minimally functional. Like, for example, if the shards could stand up on their own without being supported and hold things, then they would at least salvage what they could, and then they would throw away the rest. So that salvaged shard is actually halachically considered useful enough to still be makabel tumah. But so it's going to be a sliding scale, meaning if a really, really big jug breaks, then the owner is only going to salvage the big shards. But if a really, really small jug breaks, then the owner will even consider saving even a smaller shard. So if you find a shard in the street and you want to evaluate whether it's makabel tumah, you have to know, number one, how big is the shard, and number two, how big the original vessel that it broke off of is. So the Mishnah starts with just explaining how small a vessel could be, or a shard could be, how small could a shard be to be considered useful. So hadakin shebeklei cheres, the smallest types of earthenware vessels to be makabel tumah, the karkaros sehen, and their floors, like a shard that came from the floor, like the picture here, the dafno sehem, and their walls, like a shard that came from the wall. Yoshvin shalom mesumachin, these shards have to be able to sit without any supports, because no owner in the right mind is going to keep a shard that can't even stand on its own. So qualification number one for a shard, to be makabel tumah, you have to be able to sit on your own without being supported. So she'uran, the amount of liquid that these small vessels or these small shards have to hold, is miktei sichas katan, is the amount to anoint a katan, a baby. And the Gemara explains that to be a newborn baby, and just to anoint his small finger, that's already enough for the owner to consider keeping these small vessels or these small shards, and therefore they're makabel tumah. But again, for the owner to keep this small shard, it must have come from originally from a very small vessel. So that's only viad log, if the original vessel held until a log, which is a very small amount. So it only came from a very small vessel. But mi log viatza, if the original vessel was held from a log to a saw of liquid, then birvius, then the shard has to hold more. The shards have to hold a revius of liquid. Me saw viatzasayim, if the original vessel held from one saw to two saw, then b'chatzi log, then the shard has to hold a half a log. Misasayim viat shalosh viat chomesh, if the original vessel held from two saw, from three saw until five saw in. And the reason why the Mishnah talks like this and says 2 to 3 to 5 and doesn't just say until 5, because those were the standard vessels that were built in those days. They either held from 2 to 3 saw or 5 saw. So if the original vessel was that big, then bilog, then the shards have to hold at least a log for the owner to consider saving them. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, these are the words of Rabbi Shmuel. So as we said, it's a sliding scale, so we could see down here to make it very clear. Kli, if this is the original vessel, if the original vessel held until 5 saw, then the shard has to hold a lug, the gistra, which is Aramaic for a shard. The gistra has to hold a lug for the owner to consider keeping it to be makabel, and therefore it's considered a kli to be makabel tumah. If the original vessel held until 2 saw, then the shard has to hold a half a lug. If the original vessel held just 1 saw, then the shard has to hold a revius. And if the original vessel was small and only held until a lug, then the shard has to hold a kedesi chaskadam, the amount to anoint a baby's finger. So that's Rabbi Shmuel. Now we're going to have Rabbi Akiva, who doesn't argue at all with anything Rabbi Shmuel says. He doesn't argue with any of this. But he just classifies the 4 thresholds, these 4 thresholds, not in the size of the original kli like we did here, but he classifies them in a more practical way based on where they were made, because people knew based on where they were made, like which factory they were made and how big the vessel was. Or just by describing the kli, he would describe to you what type of kli it was, and you would know where it's from. So for this small one, Rabbi Akiva classifies it, calling it kederos hadakos, small jugs, and everyone knew what he was referring to. This category he called chavios ludios, and everyone knew what he was talking about. This category he calls lachmios, meaning it was from the manufacturer from lachmios. And this he calls the chatzavim gedolim, the big barrels. So these are just the names of the manufacturer, or just by describing the vessel, he's easily telling everyone which threshold the vessels fall in. So let's read it inside. So he's just going to rewrite the whole Mishnah with his type of classification. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva says, Eini nosein behen mida. I don't give them measurements to classify them. Ella, rather, hadakin shebekli cheres, the small types of kli cheres, the small vessels of kli cheres, v'kar krosein, and their floors, the shards that broke from the floor, v'daf nosein, and their walls, the shards that broke from the wall, yoshvin shalom musumachin, and as we said, they have to be able to sit without being supported. Sheuran, the amount of liquid that the shards have to hold, is mikdei sichas katan, is the amount to anoint a newborn baby's finger, as we said. Vi'ad kideros hadakos, until these small pans that everyone knew about. Mehakaderos hadakos, from these small pans, vi'ad chavios ludios, until the barrels that were built in lud. Then the shards biravias. The shards have to hold the revias. Me ludios, if the original vessel was from the size of the ludios barrels, vi'ad lachmios, until the lachmios barrels. Then b'chatziluk. Then the shard has to hold a chatziluk. Me lachmios vi'ad chatzavim gedolim. If the original vessel was the size of a lachmios barrel until these big barrels that that people knew about in those days, then belug. Then the shard has to hold a lug. So again, he doesn't argue at all. He just classifies it with more practical terms. Now we're going to have Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai Omer. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai argues on 2 points. He's going to argue on the biggest type of vessel and the smallest type of vessel. So he says, chatzavim gedolim, these big barrels, shiurin bishnei lugin, the shards have to hold 2 lug. 2 lug, not like the Tanakam and Rabbi Kiva who held the 1 lug. He holds that they have to hold 2 lug. The owner will only keep the shards if they hold 2 lug. And now weiter in the Mishnah, hapachin hagalilim, the small galilim pans, v'hachavyonos, and the small jugs, meaning this section here, the smallest category, shiur karkarosayim, the amount that their broken shards from the floor have to hold is kolshing, even a little bit, even less than the amount to anoint the baby's finger, is mekabel tumah. So he argues on the smallest share, he holds even a little bit, even less the amount to anoint the baby, is still able to become tomei. Ve'ein lahem defanos, but these small teeny vessels, if a shard breaks off from their defanos, from their walls, then the walls can never be mekabel tumah, because the walls can't hold any liquid, and therefore the walls can never become tomei, a shard that's coming from the walls. Now it's your turn to read the Mishnah.